Hi, and welcome to Magenta Otter Travels. For those of you who are new to the channel, I'm Dara, and I'm an American who lives with my dual citizen husband in the US most of the year and in Britain for the summertime. Today, I am going to talk to you about what I've noticed regarding how Britons speak. And I have been doing this YouTube channel for exactly 6 years. I've done a lot of language videos. In fact, the first 3 videos I ever did on this channel, sitting on this gray couch in front of this gray wall, I talked about words that Americans should never say when they go to visit Britain. I talked about different food terminology between the US and UK, and I talked about travel words that Americans should know before they go visit Britain. Because you see, I was starting my channel and I knew nothing about YouTube. I knew nothing about filming, as is obvious if you watch those original videos I did. But what I also didn't know at that point was that American people were not really going to watch my channel. It was mostly going to be British people. But it's okay. Everyone is welcome here in Magenta Otter Travels, a place where we just like to talk about British stuff. And today, when we talk about ways that British people speak that are different than American, I am not talking about vocabulary. I am not talking about pronunciation. I've done videos on those things. I've also done a couple videos about my favorite British sayings. I really loved those videos. Those were really fun to develop the list and also to share them. But today, I'm going to talk about something that is a nuance. I have been keeping a list on my phone of these things for years because for the past 5 years, Ian and I have lived in Britain for 3 to 5 months in the late spring through summertime. So I hear British people speaking a lot. And whenever I hear something that I think, that's not a thing that an American would understand, or that's a way of saying that I've never heard an American say that way, I've noted it. So now I have 20 things to share with you today. One of them actually is a cheat. It is a saying, but it was so good I had to throw it in here. So sit down, relax, grab a cuppa, and let's talk about 20 things that this American gal has noticed that British people say differently than Americans. And my goal is to try and surprise you, British people, with maybe something you didn't realize. Americans never say it that way. So listen up and tell me which of those things you might find surprising, and if you're so smart that you already know all of them and I don't surprise you with any of these 20 revelations. The first word is rubbish. I don't mean rubbish as in the garbage or the trash. Americans would probably say trash or garbage rather than rubbish. But if you use the word rubbish to them, they will probably know that you are referring to garbage. But what we don't say is rubbish as in bad, as in me saying, I'm rubbish at history. I'm not good at history. That's just not something that we say. And it's something that I have started saying because I am rubbish at history. But that's definitely not an American way of saying it. The second example is give me your details. To an American, if you said, give me your details, I'm not sure they would know what you're talking about. But I hear this all the time on cop shows. But also I do hear people saying this when they're speaking in Britain. And in the US, we would say, give me your contact information or give me your number. But never would we say, give me your details. If you said to an American, give me your details, they'd be like, what details? What do you want to know? The next phrase that I just heard a couple years ago, and I actually heard a relative, a British relative using it, and I'd never heard it before, and I was not sure what they meant when they said it. And they referred to someone feeling good in themselves. And it was one of those situations where I didn't want to ask what they meant because it didn't feel appropriate. And I just had to use my context clues to try and figure out what I thought they meant. And I've since heard this many times. And I think it refers to kind of a mental health thing of, I'm feeling good in myself. I'm feeling mentally healthy. I have confidence, that type of thing. never heard that used in the US. So let me know, British people, if I have that right and if that is a phrase that you use. The next example, this one is cheating. This is a British saying, but I didn't know it back when I did my sayings videos, which, by the way, I'll link in the description in case you missed those earlier. This I am stealing from Lucy on one of my favorite channels, the Brit Girls. She used this saying, and I'm like, that is hilarious. I have never heard that before. And the saying is, who is she, the cat's mother? And I still don't really know what that means or where it came from, but the best I can figure out, this is one of those vestiges of British formality that we as Americans don't really have. We are an informal people and sometimes a crude people, but yeah, we don't have nearly the formality that the British culture does. And I think this, who is she, the cat's mother, is kind of trying to put people in their place of addressing people correctly. But please explain that to me in the comments so that I understand the nuances, and is that something that you would say to someone? This next one is very minor, and I really am curious if British people know that Americans don't say this. And that is the phrase, leave it with me. Americans would always say either, let me follow up on that for you, let me get back to you, or I will get an answer for you, but they would not say, leave it with me. That's just a very British saying, and it's very, very commonly said in Britain. So I've just noticed that over and over again, and it always kind of goes through my American filter of, yep, that's a British way of saying something. This next one is very similar to that, and it's the phrase, bear with me. If you're a longtime viewer, you will know I love the show Miranda. That was one of the most hilarious sitcoms I have ever watched. And if you've seen it, it's a vintage sitcom. It's an old one. But if you've seen it, there's a character in there. This is back in the dawn of the use of mobile phones. And she would have her cell phone in her hand, and this character would say,
oh, hang on, bear with, back.
Honestly, it's something that I think British people say a lot, and I'm not saying I've never heard an American say that, but it's probably an American who's consumed a fair amount of British media. So we would know what it means, but it's still a very British thing to say. This next thing is someone that I'm not sure an American would say, and that's the phrase, needs doing. If you came over and I was overwhelmed with all of my Christmas preparations and I said, oh, I just have so many things. I've got this enormous list of what needs doing. No, I wouldn't say that. I would say a list of things that need to be done. I would never walk into a dilapidated house and say, whoa, there's a lot that needs doing. Nope, there's a lot that needs to be done. It's just a shorter way, totally makes sense. Not a bad thing to say, but it's also just not an American way of saying it. And another needs saying that is short and to the point, but not American, is needs must. If you've been watching my channel for a few years, you'll know my good friend Krista has come over and visited me a couple times, and we've made lots of videos together. And she is actually the one that introduced me to this phrase, needs must. She had been binge reading, because it was before the film had come out, she'd been binge reading the Thursday Murder Club series. And I think she read the whole series and read it more than once. So that is something that I think one of the characters was saying in that book of needs must. So she came to visit us in Britain a couple of years ago. And I remember like day one, she was with us. She said, needs must. And I'm like, what is that? That is not an American saying. I've never heard an American say that. I'm thinking she's using a British phrase on me right now. And so I figured out what it meant, again, using context clues, that It's just something that must happen. It needs to be done. I need to do it. And needs must. Very to the point and succinct. This phrase, nice bit of kit, I remember the first time I heard this as a YouTube creator, someone who talks to lots of other YouTube creators all the time. And we're talking about, microphones and cameras and drones and all of this kind of AV equipment, recording equipment that we deal with. I remember someone using the phrase, a British creator, using the phrase, that's a nice bit of kit. And I thought, is that a British phrase? I've never heard that before. And now I've heard it again and again. Also, I've been watching lots of fitness videos, and same thing with someone if they're, creating a home gym in their house and they have all these different weights and other equipment. Someone might say that's a nice bit of kit. And I think it just means that you have this really great set of equipment or supplies or a great setup. And so that's a British phrase, nice bit of kit. I'm not sure where that came from. It could be, is that a military reference? Lots of things are, so maybe that's what it is. But I've never heard that in the US. This one is super subtle, and I have started saying it. Come over to mine, instead of saying come over to my house. Like, oh, let's get together for dinner. We could go out to a restaurant, or we could come over to mine. That is a very British way of saying it. But obviously, if you say that to an American, they'll know exactly what you mean. But it's just a nuance, not something an American would say. For some reason, just a British way of phrasing something that hasn't crossed the pond yet. But I think a few of us are saying it now. Okay, this next one is controversial. And that is, I'm sat here, instead of saying I'm sitting here. I've heard so many people in Britain use this way of speaking, saying, I'm sat here on a Sunday morning doing a crossword puzzle and on my third cup of tea. I'm sat here watching YouTube videos and wondering how can there be so many stupid people in the world. I'm sat here, etc., etc. An American would always say, I'm sitting here. Now, I also have seen online in the interaction between people conversing in the comments, sanctimonious British people saying, that's not a way to say it properly. You don't say, I'm sat here. You say, I'm sitting here. So tell me, Britons, is that okay to say I'm sat here? Is I'm sat here something you say? Is this a regional thing? So spill the tea on that. Give me the scoop on that. What is the deal with I'm sat here? And then we have soon as. In the US, we definitely have the phrase as soon as possible. And we will often say, get that to me as soon as possible. And if we're going to shorten it, we will say ASAP. Get that to me ASAP. But I've heard British people say soon as an abbreviation of as soon as possible. So using it in a sentence, they might say, I need that soon as. That is not something I have ever heard an American say. Again, probably too many of these examples come from cop shows because I watch way too many British detective shows. But tell me, British people, if that is something that sounds really normal to you and something that you say, or is that something that's only on British cop shows? Let me know if I'm being irrelevant. Okay, my memory is not good enough to know if I've talked about this in a prior video, but I do love this example, and that is on about. What are you on about? That is something that you will hear in Britain, whereas in the US, I think people would say, what are you going on about? What are you rambling on about? What are you talking about? And it helped me understand the nuances here. I don't think it's just, what are you talking about? What are you saying? What do you mean? I don't think it's merely inquiring about the meaning of what you're saying. I think it's also a bit of a dig of you're a little crazy or you're a little prattling on about something. And that's what I'm asking you when I say, what is he on about now? Or what is she on about now? It's a little bit of a judgy thing to say. So let me know if I have that right as I'm learning the nuances between ways to say things on either side of the pond of what does that mean to say someone is on about. Okay, this next one is a vocabulary thing, so I'm cheating again a little bit, but I can't help it because I love this one so much I have to say it. And that is central reservation. So fun fact, when I first graduated from grad school, I worked for Hilton Hotels Corporation. And I used to come visit the call center, which was the call center for the whole country. Coincidentally, it was here in the Dallas area. So you want to make a booking at a specific hotel and you call that hotel, you will often be sent to the central reservation line. You'll be sent to the call center where all reservations are handled. So if you used the two words adjacent to each other, central reservation, to an American, they would either have no clue what you're talking about, or they would think you're talking about reservations, as in probably a hotel chain. When in fact, a central reservation in Britain is the median strip down the middle of a road. So in the US, we would call that bit of grass, pavement, whatever that divides the two directions of traffic, we would call that a median strip or just a median. I don't know that I've asked British people, do you know what a median is? If I said median, would you know I was talking about a central reservation? Or would you not know what that was? Okay, this next one I think is really funny too. Repeats on me. I don't like eating dill pickles because they repeat on me the next day. I think it means like you're belching or burping or you have that taste in your mouth or that smell or whatever of what you had eaten earlier. If it's a particularly pungent, odoriferous food that is reminding you about it the next day. I've never heard an American say that, but I think it's really funny. If you are British, did you know that that's something Americans don't say? And this next one seems similar to me, but has nothing to do with it. And that is being made redundant. In the US, when a big company eliminates a lot of positions, we call that there are mass layoffs. You're getting laid off. I was laid off at work today, which means I wasn't fired for poor performance. I was eliminated because my position was eliminated. That's the way we say it. But in the UK and other places, Australia, New Zealand, I've heard them use the same phrase. That when someone loses their job, they will say they were made redundant, which totally makes sense when you think about it, I guess, because redundant means duplicative work is being done, therefore one can be eliminated, or that work is now superfluous, so we will streamline and eliminate it. But yeah, that's a very commonly said thing with British English, saying that someone was made redundant, but just not the way we say it in the US. The next phrase is something that Ian said when he was speaking British talk. And I'm like, I'm not sure I've ever heard an American say that. And that is walking outside and saying that it feels close. I think that means it's like humid, that the air is so thick with humidity that it just kind of feels close to you, like the air is heavy and hanging on you. I've never heard an American say that. It reminds me of something I think I have talked about in another video, which is the euphemism for cold being that British people will say it's fresh. So you walk outside and say, it's fresh. It feels close out here. Both of those things, I would venture to say Americans would not know what you're talking about. The next one is the word shift. I have heard this used so many times in British people speaking in a way that I've never heard with Americans, and that is, we need to move, we need to get out of here, we need to shift. We need to shift this stuff, we need to move this stuff. That's not really an American way of saying it. We've been watching the series Dairy Girls lately, about a group of teenagers in Northern Ireland, I believe in the 90s. It is a hilarious show. I can't say I recommend it because the language is it's not clean, but it is a very funny show. And they use this phrase a lot. We need to shift. You need to shift. um, and yeah, just not an American way of saying it. We would say, we need to leave. We need to get out of here. Not, we need to shift. Okay, I only have 2 left. I've saved my favorites for the end. And I will start this one by saying, was Yoda British? Because British people have this backwards way of talking versus how Americans would say the same thing. I will give you 3 examples just to give you the idea of what I'm talking about, but I think there's probably an infinite number of examples. So a British person might say, good meal this, rather than an American saying, this was a good meal. Or fancy car, innit? Where an American would say, isn't it a fancy car? And a British person might say, well done, you. An American would say, you did well. So it just seems like a bit of Yoda sentence part reversal, the way that the British phrases are versus the American ones. And yeah, I love it. It's just very colloquial British, and a very, very minor nuancy difference between how we speak on either side of the pond. And this last one I saved for the end because it's my favorite. It took me so long to figure this one out. I grew up my whole life saying, my name is Dara. And in school, the first foreign language I learned was Spanish. And I learned that in Spanish, what you usually say, you can literally translate, my name is Dara. But what you really say when you're introducing yourself in Spanish is, I'm called Dara. So as Ian's talking to me about how things are said in German, and we're traveling all over Europe, and I'm getting to know little bits and pieces of conversational languages around Europe, I notice this trend is continuing, that people say, I'm called, he's called, she's called, when talking about people's names. And I finally realized, again, watching British detective shows, that that's what British people do a lot too. They will say, she's called Sheila, rather than her name is Sheila. Americans, I would venture to say, never do that. We always say, my name is this, his name is this, her name is that. We don't say, I'm called, she's called, he's called. So I think that one's really funny, and it just shows that Americans, I think, are this outlier. Let me know if you know other languages. I actually just started learning Norwegian last week, so I'm on the language learning app, learning Norwegian, and this drove it home for me again because they do the same thing. I'm called, he's called, she's called, for introducing people and saying their names. So if you know of any other language where people say, my name is, rather than I'm called, let me know, because now I'm kind of feeling like we Americans are just on a little island of weirdness versus everybody else in the world. And yeah, that probably is true in a lot of ways. But thanks so much for listening to my list of 20 things that we say differently in the US versus the UK. Let me know if there's anything you disagree with, whether you're British or American. If I made some claim that things are different and you think I got it wrong, let me know. And if you're British or American, let me know if you found any of these 20 things surprising, if you learned anything new. Thanks so much for watching this video. Please be sure to check out some of my other prior language videos down in the description, and do something good in the world today.